The U.S.'s second largest city is swept by a wave of mass arrests as protests against President Donald Trump's immigration crackdown enter its sixth day. There is heavy military presence in California as we speak. Los Angeles police swiftly enforced the downtown curfew, making arrests moments after it took effect last night. So far, the police have arrested at least 25 people for violating the curfew. Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass said the curfew imposed to stop vandalism and looting in the city. Take a listen.
I wanted to let the city know that I have declared a local emergency and issued a curfew for downtown Los Angeles to stop the vandalism, to stop the looting.
Heavily armed security officers, including several riding horses, patrolling near government buildings. 700 U.S. Marines are on standby, ready to step foot in L.A. Another 2,000 National Guard troops are headed to the city. The heavy military movement took place 48 hours after President Trump directed Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth to mobilize the battalion. Law enforcement officers confronted demonstrators outside the federal building as protests, riot police on horses and foot surrounded a group of few hundred that had gathered in the area. An Australian Broadcasting Corporation cameraman was hit in the chest by a less lethal round while filming the Los Angeles protests. U.S. President Donald Trump has pledged to liberate Los Angeles from what he claims is an invasion by a foreign enemy. California's leaders who disapprove of Trump's decision moved to the court seeking to prevent the Republican from sending thousands of troops onto the streets. However, their request was immediately denied by a judge. They will appear in court once again on Thursday. California Governor Gavin Newsom, who claimed the presence of troops exacerbates tensions, has asked the judge for an emergency injunction regarding the troop deployment, arguing that it's unlawful as well as excessive and necessary. This was earlier, and it was rejected.
Trump is pulling a military dragnet all across Los Angeles, well beyond his stated intent to just go after violent and serious criminals. His agents are arresting dishwashers, gardeners, day laborers, and seamstresses. That's just weakness masquerading as strength. Donald Trump's government isn't protecting our communities. They're traumatizing our communities. And that seems to be the entire point.
Demonstrations have quickly spread to other cities nationwide, including Dallas and Austin and Texas, Chicago and New York, as well as in Atlanta, Georgia. In the Atlanta suburb of Brookhaven, dozens of demonstrators waved American and Mexican flags and held signs against U.S. immigration and custom enforcement. In Texas, where police in Austin used chemical irritants to disperse several hundred demonstrators, National Guard troops have been put on standby in areas where demonstrations are planned. U.S. President is mulling the possibility of invoking the Insurrection Act, which authorizes the president to deploy military force inside the U.S. to suppress rebellion or domestic violence or to enforce the law in certain situations. It's one of the most extreme emergency powers available to a U.S. president. For the latest, we are now being joined by Eugene Craig III, political analyst and former chair of the Black Republicans for Harris. Thank you so much for joining us on WION. So California is in a state of disarray, to say the least. Emergencies, curfews. And Gavin Newsom, however, decided to somewhat soft launch a presidential campaign, according to many analysts. What are your thoughts about how he's handling the situation?
It's a lot to unpack, right? We got MAGA, like what I was calling MAGA Gavin, over the last couple months now. A hard pivot back to, I guess, his political roots. But let's be very clear here. This is a conflict. This is a conflict caused by Donald Trump's own making. There's no need for National Guard troops to be on the streets of LA right now. Police are doing their job. They're handling the protests effectively. Trump, this is what Trump wants. He wants riots. He wants to be able to use the Insurrection Act. We saw it in his first term during the Black Lives Matter protests, right? He was begging to use it in D.C. against the protesters and whatnot. But these protests have been mostly peaceful for the most part. As you've even seen, minimal arrests last night, 25 people out of thousands, tens of thousands of people protesting. But these protests are going to spread. And the thing is this, right? Nobody's against violent offenders being removed from our country. Nobody's against rapists, murderers, traffickers, being removed from our countries. But the thing is this, right? Donald Trump and his administration are weaponizing ICE to go after law-abiding people that, literally just trying to make a better way for their families. And in reality, we should be working towards comprehensive immigration reform because at the end of the day, if you're going to go after anybody, you probably should go after the people hiring these people, not necessarily people just looking for work.
And I guess the question and the disconnect right now, and this is just, there's so many nuances to this. I completely agree with you, Eugene. But the fact that just, coming into all of this and looking from an outside perspective, the international audience is looking and wondering whether or not these are lawful citizens when they actually entered the United States illegally or not. And I think that's where the debate really starts to get nuanced, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, it does get nuanced, right? But the thing is this, America has had an immigration issue. And this is the other thing. Nobody's saying we can't deal with our immigration issue, but we should be dealt with in a humane way. Human rights have to still be at the forefront of things. Asylum seekers still should be able to seek asylum here in the United States. But what we've seen from this administration is that, those that have been in some kind of protective status because of things that have happened in their home countries, they're sending them back to those, torn up countries, some war torn, some dealing with dictators, some dealing with massive human rights situations, while all the while, hey, he's importing, white Afrikaans from South Africa, based off of a made up crisis. And so this is, we have Stephen Miller and Steve Bannon, who have the heir of the president driving this policy. A lot of this is laid out and written in Project 2025. And hey, we tried to tell you, not you, but, tried to tell the audiences and the voters during the election that this is what's going to happen. That's what we're here. This is the final phase of the formula. But that doesn't mean that, people shouldn't stand up for their rights. People shouldn't stand up for the rights of others, because the beauty of America is that if you're on American soil, the United States Constitution applies to you, which means that due process is still a thing, even though many would rather it not be a thing.
And do you think that these protests are going to spread as we move forward all throughout the summer? It seems very similar to the BLM protests and how they started. Or do you think that it's going to come more under control? We're seeing demonstrations here in New York, not as big, but I did see a pretty big one in Atlanta and Chicago, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I would say, look, these protests are going to spread through the summer. And look, for what it's worth, 99% of the BLM protests were peaceful. Most protests in America are peaceful. And so, I think these are going to spread because this is the thing, right? While myself or you may be an American citizen, we all know people that may be undocumented and, that affects. And, you can never go to war with the empathy quotient. And so, yes, I do think these protests are going to spread. And I think that, Donald Trump's already on the losing side of this issue. And I think it's only going to further exacerbate things going forward.
All right. We'll be watching very closely. Eugene Craig III, thank you so much for joining us.
Appreciate it, Susan. Anytime.